Good morning, everyone. My name is Zoe Leonarzik. I work at Florida Institute for Child Welfare as our lead learning experience designer. Our webinar title for today is Follow the Love Pilot Project, Strengthening Youth Connections. And Annette is joining us from the University of Buffalo, where she is the PhD program director and an associate professor in the School of Social Work. And with that, I'm going to keep my introduction brief and pass it off to Annette.
Thanks for the introduction and welcome everyone. It's great to see some folks here joining us, including some of our partners for Follow Love. So I see that a couple of folks are here from Selfless Love, Kendra, JR. Thanks for joining. Feel free to chime in the chat if you have anything that you'd like to add as I'm going through some of the learnings here today. So as Zoe said, my name's Annette Samanchon-Jones. I do work at the University of Buffalo School of Social Work, and I have most of my professional career is in child welfare. I worked in child welfare in Chicago, in Illinois, Minnesota, and Tennessee. Before going back to get my PhD in social work. And now all of my research is very much focused on child welfare. And this area of research holds a special place in my heart, really thinking about how can we make sure that we're strengthening connections for youth who touch the child welfare system. And so I'm excited and thrilled to share a little bit about some of the learnings that we had from a pilot project that we did that was funded through the Florida Institute for Child Welfare. So I'm going to jump right in. Again, I'm excited to talk with you at the end of my presentation. So if you have any questions as you go through, please do put those in the chat so we can keep track of any questions that you might have. Or in the Q&A. But I'm going to start us off with just a brief overview of why the importance of youth connections and youth voice. If you're here, you likely already feel like those are important, but I'm going to back that up by some research. Then I'll share a little bit about the Follow Love Project pilot study, which included the use of the Youth Connection Scale, which is, I'll go into that a little bit as well. And then I'll end with some reflections, learnings, and strategies that our team on the pilot project kind of reflected on as we worked through the project. And then again, hopefully ending with some question and answer and interactive discussion. So beginning with youth connections and youth voice. So as, again, if you're here in the field of child welfare, we know that there are federal mandates that focuses and mandates that we all think about and work towards the safety, permanence, and well-being of any child who comes to the attention of the child welfare system. And so we're talking about a piece of that and thinking about permanence and well-being. Of course, our main goal still is, as we work with youth, young people, kids, youth, our main goal is to achieve legal permanence for children who come to the attention of child welfare, especially for those who are in out-of-home placement. We're focused on legal permanence, but I'm excited that in recent years, we're also paying attention to not just legal permanence, but also relational and emotional permanence. Sometimes, hopefully, those things go together. As we achieve legal permanence, hopefully the youth is also feeling a sense of belonging. But sometimes those things can happen in different ways and maybe happens with a network of supportive adults. And so when I'm thinking about relational permanence, I'm borrowing from other scholars and folks who have defined that and just thinking about different domains. So we're thinking about the financial, social, and emotional safety net, which is particularly important as we think about youth who are transitioning to adulthood. So transition age youth who are in adolescence, in emerging adulthood, we think about our programs that focus on independent living, but we also know that what maybe better reflects the reality of the world we live in is thinking about tools and how to navigate interdependence. How do we build supportive networks around ourselves, around the youth that we work with as they transition to adulthood. And then again, finally, what really drives the work that I do is thinking about how can we ensure that every young person who we work with, every single young person that we work with who comes to the attention of the child welfare system, how can we ensure that they have a sense of belonging, that they have a place where they feel is home, where they belong. And so, as I mentioned, this is also well supported by a growing body of literature, not just literature and research in child welfare, but we know in general for positive youth development, we know that young people do better when they are connected to supportive adults. And this is across all different domains of well-being. We know that youth who are connected have increased resilience, self-esteem, improved mental health indicators, tend to do better in school. And I think key here is also their social skill development. Really thinking about how young people build socio-emotional skills and so that they can build healthy relationships as they transition to adulthood. We also know from research and some of the research that I've done, and I'm sure if you work with young people, transition age youth, I'm sure you've seen this in the work that you also do. But we know that youth have themselves identified the importance of relationships as a key part of their own well-being. We also know that the young people that we're working with, the young adults, many, maybe most, all have experienced some type of disrupted network, often have experienced past trauma, grief, loss, ambiguous loss, maybe feeling ambivalent about a number of the relationships that they have with family members. And so, thinking about that as the context, and then as we work with young people in our, whatever your role might be, whether it's a direct service provider or administrator, thinking about program development, policy development, I really want to, I think part of the launching of the Follow the Love pilot project was really thinking about what can we do in our roles to help ensure that we're rebuilding that capacity for connectedness. We also know from research on trauma and adverse experiences, we know that to really go to help young people on a path to healing, to successful transition to adulthood, we know that oftentimes that recovery and healing from traumatic experiences best occurs within the context of safe and healthy relationships. So focusing on rebuilding those social, emotional aspects of well-being, research is showing can really help significantly improve long-term outcomes. I'm sure many of us are familiar with the ACEs studies that have been longitudinal studies that have been going on for a number of years. But I think the important piece of that is not just recognizing the impact of adverse experiences, but seeing how we can intervene to change the trajectory to ensure that we're putting those protective and promotive factors in place so that we can reduce those adverse impacts that we know many of the young people that we work with are experiencing. And so again, I'm hopeful because I do see us as a child welfare system, as multiple systems working with young people, working with children and families, that I do think we're shifting away from just focusing on the child or the family, but recognizing a child within a family, thinking about the whole child, moving towards how can we really not just see kids surviving, but thriving. And I do see this in kind of the umbrella of using a trauma-informed approach that, again, I think is growing and I'm excited about. And so the other piece of that that I think is critical, and I think we're doing better, but still have a long way to go in some of these pieces, is making sure no matter what we do, that we're centering the young person, the child, the young adult. We're centering that person in all the work that we do, recognizing that that young person, that child, the young adult, is within the context of their family and hopefully a supportive community. And so a lot of the driving work again of Follow the Love pilot project was really thinking about how can we center youth voice in the work that we do. Prioritizing our own accountability to our work by seeking youth voice, including youth voice, especially, I'm sure we're all familiar with Nothing About Us Without Us, making sure that anytime we're making decisions about the youth's future, that we are centering them and asking them to engage in that decision-making process. So all of that is just some context. Again, I'm sure many of us, if you're interested in this topic, agree with what the research is showing, but I do like to just provide that foundation to make sure that we're also showing that this is backed by evidence and what we know to be best practice. So that's the context of some of the conversations we were having as we worked with some pilot partners that were looking to develop the Follow the Love pilot project. Dr. Elizabeth Winter was not available today, but I do just want to really give credit to Dr. Winter. She really was the impetus and developer of the initial idea for Follow the Love. And I'm excited to say she has a book that she has published. That's a picture of that here. And I'm not sure if I'm able to make some of these links live or share these with people who are attending, but I'll be sure to make sure that the Institute has all of these links so that if you want to link to her book, you can hear even more about the pilot project. And so again, we have some partners who are here today from Selfless Love Foundation. They were the project lead on this. That was again generously funded by the Florida Institute of Child Welfare. But they're also, Dr. Winter convened a great advisory group, including a number of youth with lived experience, as well as all of these different organizations and institutions that are listed here. And then I am just one piece of the puzzle, but I was excited to be joined by some partners, graduate students as well here at the University of Buffalo, and Dr. Shelby, Lisa Shelby at Florida State University. So there's many, many people behind the work that I'm going to be talking about. So I just wanted to make sure I was giving credit to the entire team, including the advisory group who really helped develop this idea. So Follow the Love was a pilot project that, again, started with Dr. Winter, who is, many of you might know, based in Florida, working with Selfless Love at the time, thinking about strengthening child welfare in the state of Florida. So this pilot project took place in Florida, and with, I think, a number of people thinking about how, again, we know that there are mandates to achieve safety, permanency, and well-being, but how can we better look at those second two pieces, really thinking about permanency and well-being and how they're intersecting. Florida had included in their statute this phrase, this mandate that young adults should leave foster care with a lifelong connection to supportive adults. But there wasn't really a lot of teeth behind that statute, that piece of the statute. And so one of the goals of Follow the Love was to think about how we can help operationalize that and help actualize that goal. So the aims of the project are listed here. We really were thinking about how can we start with a small number of jurisdictions, but think about how can we enhance child welfare systems understanding and prioritizing of relational permanence in child welfare. We also hope to increase the number and strength of youth supportive adult connections for those who participated in the pilot, and also, again, increase the engagement of transitioning age youth in their own permanency planning and decision making. So over the course of 18 months, we did pilot this project with 6 different child welfare jurisdictions. in the state of Florida. And I'll just give you a very quick snapshot of what was included in that pilot. So as part of the pilot, for those 6 jurisdictions, we did, there was still considerations around COVID. There were some significant weather events in Florida during this time period. And so most of the work that we did was actually virtual. So we did virtual trainings, strength-based trainings with all of the staffs in those participating jurisdictions, with staff who were working with transition age youth, to make sure that everyone knew what was happening in those agencies at the time. And so we started the project with a training for the agencies. We asked agencies to identify who was going to play the role of Follow the Love facilitators. So these were the key folks within the agencies who would be doing the work of the project. The training itself was also just similar to what we're talking about here, just really prioritizing and highlighting the importance of engaging youth in the process and the importance of thinking about both legal permanence as well as relational permanence. So that was the foundation of the training. We then asked agencies, once they had the facilitators identified, we asked them to think about youth who they were working with who were ages 16 to 17, who were in out-of-home placement. And again, the goal of focusing on this age group was we wanted to work with agencies that were working with transition age youth to help ensure, going back to that statute, that no youth were aging out of care without that supportive connection. So that was the focus for the pilot project. The role of the facilitators, I'll just talk a little bit. This is a very brief snapshot of kind of what the project included. But the facilitators, again, were the key stakeholders that were carrying out the work of the project. So facilitators met with the youth, and facilitators, agencies and jurisdictions identified different people that played this role of facilitators. Some agencies had recently hired folks who were focused on permanency, Wendy's Wonderful Kids staff. So there were different types of positions who were playing this role, but those folks met with the youth individually, and to really talk with the youth about who were supportive and meaningful adults, who was supportive and meaningful to them. Maybe people that were currently in their lives that they had contact with, or people that they may have lost touch with while they were in out-of-home placement. And so that was the first step, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the tools that we use to do that, including the Youth Connection Scale and Permanency Pact, which I'll go through a little bit here in a minute. Once the facilitators spoke with the youth and engaged with the youth, the next step was they have a list now, hopefully, of potentially supportive adults. And so the facilitator worked with the youth's team. So the other providers that were already working with the youth, looking at this potential list of supportive adults, and developed a plan to reach out to those adults to determine the adults' interest, their capacity, their commitment that they might be able to provide to this youth, and help the youth work towards their own goals and just be a supportive connection to the youth. So once that information was shared and a plan was developed, then the facilitator would reach out to those supportive adults and begin to make those connections, reconnections, or strengthen the connections that already existed. And so now, and I'll just share, I'll share more specifics about the tools that we used, including the Youth Connection Scale. But I just wanted to quickly lay out some of the information that was included in the initial pilot of the steps that facilitators followed as part of Follow Love pilot project. So again, building rapport with the youth. Step 2 is discovery. Step 3, engaging connections. Step 4, developing a plan to strengthen those connections. And then ideally follow up to assess how well connected the youth felt at the end of the pilot. And so I'm going to now share a little bit more detail about the youth connection skill. So this was the tool that was used at that initial stage was facilitators met with the youth, sat down with the youth, and had this tool to go through the youth. Who is an important adult to you? And so I was lucky enough to be part of a team of folks who developed the youth connection scale almost over a decade ago now, which is hard to believe, at the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare at the University of Minnesota. And this was another agency university partnership. This agency, A New Family Services, based out of Minnesota and Wisconsin, was doing a lot of work around relational permanency. And so they reached out to try to evaluate the work that they were doing. Again, one of the indicators of permanency, of course, is legal permanence, but they knew there was a lot of other work involved that really wasn't captured just by legal permanence. And so together we developed this tool that was focused on transition-aged youth from age 15 to 21. It's a 100-point scale that really looks at several different domains of youth connectedness. The number of connections, strength of those connections, types of support, and overall level of connectedness of foster youth. And so I'm just going to show some snapshots of what the tool looks like. This tool is available through the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare. So again, I will try to share those links with people who are attending if you're not familiar with this tool already. But so this is the tool that was also used in the pilot project. So if the facilitators asked the youth if there had been other tools that they had done, maybe with their workers or within their agencies or prior workers, where the youth had been asked to complete tools like a genogram or a connectedness map. Has this work been done since they've been in out-of-home care? Or a life book. Many of you might be familiar with life books, but this is another way that youth can kind of help make sure that they have their own continuity of snapshots, of photos, scrapbook of things people that are important to them, places that are important to them throughout their own past and development. So was the first section. But the second section here is really asking the youth. This is really where kind of just getting a sense from the youth themselves, who is important to them? Who's someone that is a meaningful relationship, someone that was a meaningful relationship that maybe has been disconnected. And so the facilitator would go through this with the youth. This might look a little bit like a checklist that the youth can fill out themselves, but we really encourage people to fill this out, have a dialogue and discussion with the youth, and then kind of use this as a way to track that discussion. The next step is asking the youth to think about, these are people that were important to you. Now let's talk about how strong those connections are right now. So this is a snapshot from the youth's view of how strong these connections are. And this, of course, can also indicate, if you're doing this within a dialogue with the youth, you can identify relationships that maybe were important to the youth, but they would like to see stronger. So this can be an opportunity for some of the work of the pilot, of the Family to Love work that we were doing. The next, if folks are familiar with the Permanency Pack from Foster Club, this is adapted from that, really asking the youth to think about who in your life they can count on for different types of support. This is also a really great opportunity to encourage the youth to think about, what does this look like after you leave care? So maybe right now their foster parent is providing a lot of these types of support, or their worker, or their IL worker, someone that they're working with. So really thinking about asking the youth to think about who these people might be. And it may not be one person. We really, encourage people to think broadly of having a network of support. And so thinking intentionally with the youth, who do they have that they can turn to for all of these different types of support as they're moving towards adulthood? And then we do ask these kind of overarching questions of the youth as well. So the facilitator is trying to see from the youth's perspective, maybe you only have a few connections, but they're really strong and meaningful. And so they may say they feel very well connected. So again, this is really asking the youth, asking facilitators to think about where does the youth see their level of connectedness. And so that was a quick snapshot of the Youth Connection Scale. Again, so this was one of the tools, one of the primary tools that was used in the pilot to help start and launch those conversations. And I'll try to share these links, but if you go to the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare, there's a Youth Connection Scale, a whole toolkit. So that has a whole series of different tools and resources, including a copy of the tool itself that you can download and use. I did work with another agency in New York State to adapt this for younger youth. So if you're working with kids who are not quite transition age youth yet, there's the Youth Connection Scale Child version for children ages 9 to 14. That's also available on this website. There's an implementation guide there that includes a scoring guide. So again, for folks who might be interested in checking this out, I would encourage you to look at the implementation guide as well. And then there's some links to other training modules and resources for the Youth Connection Scale. So feel free to check that out for more information there. And then again, for this particular pilot, Follow the Love, Foster Club was one of the partners that Dr. Winter initially convened. And the goal for the pilot project, the goal was that through the work of Follow the Love, where the facilitators were hopefully strengthening connections, one of the final pieces, that last step and the 6 steps, was commitment. And so this was the tool, Permanency Pact was the tool that was meant to be used for the youth and to complete with the supportive adult. And so again, if many of you are probably already familiar with the Permanency Pact, but this was the tool that we also used in the project to celebrate and solidify and make very intentional. Like, these are the things that this supportive adult is telling the youth, you can count on me for these things. So, we're making a pact that I will provide these types of support. So that was the final step of the project. So that was as the project was laid out. And now I will say that we did, for this pilot project, there were some great learnings and great outcomes, and also some challenges. So I'm going to share a little bit about all of that now, of what we found from our project. So for the pilot project, again, I was part of the evaluation team. The initial plan was we had 6 jurisdictions, and that was broken up into 2 rounds of the pilot. So there were 3 jurisdictions for each round. We were aimed to collect agency survey data to assess what are the current practices, the perspectives around relational permanency and building supportive connections. So we had some agency data that we collected. Again, for the youth data, the primary data that we were looking at was the Youth Connection Scale that we just quickly went over. And so the aim of the goal was to complete that. The facilitators would complete that initially with youth, and then at the end of the project, about 6 months after working with them. So it's about a 6-month process or window that we were working or looking towards, as well as completed permanency packs. So, cutting to the short, the short version here. Again, great learnings from this project. And also there were some challenges that we experienced. And so we had some difficulty for a variety of reasons, including some of the weather events that I mentioned, that made the quantitative outcomes a little bit difficult to determine. So in response, we shifted our focus to really think about more of a qualitative approach to focusing on learnings, reflecting on challenges, and then I'm going to propose some implementation strategies for those who might be considering implementing something like this in your jurisdiction. And so I'm going to share a little bit about kind of how we got to these findings. So again, we focused more on the qualitative data that were collected both from interviews with Follow Love facilitators, program directors, program leads. We also met monthly with Selfless Love Foundation hosted a monthly facilitator check-in. And that was a really rich source of data, an opportunity to share successes, share challenges, share reflections, strategies that might help address some of those barriers. And so the qualitative data was also taken from minutes and reflections on those meetings. So from that, we did a thematic analysis. And now I'm going to share a little bit about some of the learnings and impact of the pilot. So I'm going to start quickly with, again, we had to make a lot of shifts, twists and turns, but through our qualitative evaluation, we did find still some great impacts that we had both on youth as well as the agencies that participated. So for thinking about the impact of youth, again, this was taken from the qualitative sources I just mentioned. That some of the facilitators and highlighted that the youth that they worked with felt empowered, even just by asking them about eliciting their own definition of what is permanency, what's a supportive connection for you. For some of these youth, this was the first time that they felt their own voices, their own preferences were heard. Other facilitators mentioned that some youth really just having intentional space to think about this and to think, a little bit beyond this. We were asking them to think a year or so out what this looks like as they transition to adulthood. Some youth were really motivated to start thinking about the connections they had, the role of permanency, the role of supportive connections as they transition to adulthood. And then others noted that engaging the youth in these discussions, they could see skills developing, problem-solving skills, youth making links to resources, advocating for themselves more often, flourishing when they are really, when they're increase their voice in their own decision-making, asking for help. A number of facilitators mentioned this as a key impact that they saw was a key impact and growth is seeing youth ask for help. Particularly there were a couple examples of youth asking for help in navigating difficult relationships within their own supportive network. So that's a quick snapshot of some of the impact. We also asked about the impact on the work that they do. So the professionals, the providers, the agencies and jurisdictions that they worked in. And so these are just some of the positive impacts of doing even just a small pilot project like this. So the people that were engaged in these monthly meetings noted just having a network of other providers that were focused on this gave themselves a renewed understanding, a renewed priority, not like permission, but a renewed excitement of focusing on permanency planning, focusing on youth engagement, and making sure that they're thinking about being able to prioritize this work. Many mentioned the importance of, for some facilitators, this might have been, starting conversations after they've been working with youth for a number of months, or maybe they've been in and out of home care for a number of years. And so many folks mentioned the importance of, as they move forward in their work, that they want to focus on supportive connections from day one. As soon as, if a youth needs to enter out of home care, focusing from day one, minute one, about how to maintain those connections for youth. And especially challenging is if that hasn't happened, now that youth are just a few months away from potentially aging out, these conversations can be much more challenging. Some agencies had, again, specialized positions to focus on this particular work. And many people thought that was a good idea. For a variety of reasons, but that we know that a lot of direct line workers already have too much on their plate. And so to do some of this work well means spending time, having time to talk with both the youth and the supportive adults. So this can be a time-intensive process, especially if youth were in that position that we just talked about. Maybe it's been a long time, maybe they've been disconnected. So really having to rebuild those connections and loop in kind of the whole team to support the youth and rebuilding their capacity to maintain and rebuild these connections. Another positive impact, though, was having time and space, having these monthly facilitator meetings, being able to engage in conversations around this across jurisdictions. People also felt that there was a ripple effect, being able to see impact of the providers they were working with, then also increasing their focus, their intentionality around supportive connections. So that was all very exciting to see. But now I'm going to shift again. So just some final challenges and strategies that we discussed as part of the pilot project. Some of these will come as no surprise because some of these are true for any type of new thing that we're trying in child welfare. And that, of course, is turnover. So just the ongoing challenges of having a stable, strong workforce that has the capacity to try new things and to do, shifting focus. Having a critical mass is really important if we're trying to shift organizational values and priorities. And so thinking about how to do that in the context of child welfare, where we still struggle with a lot of turnover and keeping that consistency. Workload issues I've already mentioned, but that was mentioned a number of times. Having the capacity to do this work could be challenging. People mentioned having additional tools to help identify supportive adults. We introduced, as part of this work, additional tools beyond just the Youth Connection scale. Tools that come from other models like Wendy's Wonderful Kids or Family Search and Engagement, using tools like eco maps or mobility mapping. So having a lot of tools at the ready so that you can, maybe if this tool isn't working or is not speaking to the youth that you're working with, something else might work and help them engage and reflect on where they've been, who they've been connected to, and how they can reconnect. Ensuring agencies have the resources in place, so that can be specialized positions, but also making sure that we wanted to be really intentional that youth also have their whole team on board. And so it wasn't just that one person in the agency knows what this work is about, but that youth have the support of other adults and providers they might be working with, other workers, because this can bring up a lot of this can be very difficult. To think about, especially for youth that may not feel connected to supportive adults. This can bring up a lot of that same grief and trauma from some past disrupted relationships. So making sure that there's a team in place that can work with the youth as needed. There's also us providers, reluctance of foster parents, of workers, other adults, because maybe we don't want to rock the boat. Maybe things are okay right now with the youth. We don't want to disrupt anything, which is a valid, that's valid. But also I've been doing this work now for a number of years. And what I really believe is that this is hard work, but we don't want youth to have to do this on their own as they've already transitioned to adulthood. So while they are in our care, whatever that might look like, out of home care, as we're working with youth in different capacities, making sure that we are putting those supports in place, helping them rebuild those tools, even though it might be difficult. And so that is the last challenge of kind of balancing feeling intrusive versus supportive. And so I'm going to just highlight a couple of strategies that we kind of reflected on as a team, and then hopefully save some time for Q&A here too. But one of the key things that, that we thought we could do better, and so we want to share with jurisdictions, if you're thinking about initiating a project like this, is to really use implementation science, because each jurisdiction, each agency, each organization may have its own barriers, its own unique barriers or facilitators to implementing this. So ensuring that all of the stakeholders are on board early on, thinking about how this might fit within your particular context. And making sure, again, I think the key piece, making sure that there's capacity, priority, shifting those priorities to make sure that we're paying attention to this from day one. A couple of other key findings that really came out of this was the importance, again, this can be very challenging work. Some youth, this might be easy squeezy, and youth have a clear set of folks who they count on, that they're connected to. But for other youth, this can be really difficult conversations. And so thinking about a way to make sure that that's step one of building trust, building rapport, that's really a key focus. This project, this approach does focus on those pre-existing positive relationships. So there's other really great programs out there that are linking youth to mentors. This really focuses identifying people who are already connected to youth, thinking about their own unique experiences, building that social network. And again, helping youth to think ahead about what are the importance of connections, especially if they've maybe had a lot of experiences of mistrust and now are actively disconnecting or not really able to re-engage. A couple, just again, key, of course, I was one of the key developers of the Youth Connection Scale, but this is true for any of those tools we just mentioned. Just the importance of having intentional space, whether it's the Youth Connection Scale, again, or other tools, is to really helping the worker and the youth think about what are the areas of strengths and areas of needed attention around this focus of supportive connections. So making sure to utilize this tool to create space, having dialogue and discussions about grief, loss, and how to rebuild those healthy supportive connections. This has also been used as a supervision tool. So supervisors, we know there's a key role for supervisors in child welfare in initiating shifts and change. And so making sure that, in some of the agencies that I'm working with that are using this tool, they're using the Youth Connection School tool as in monthly supervision as a way to check in. How are things going with this goal of strengthening youth connections? And then, as we did in this pilot project, using a tool like the Youth Connections tool to measure and evaluate how programs are doing. In this case, again, using it initially with youth, and then prior to discharge, or 6 or 12 months after working with the youth. The Youth Connection Scale can also be an evaluative tool in that case. So some final takeaways. So for folks, jurisdictions who, again, I hope folks are here who are hopefully looking to integrate this work more in your jurisdictions. These are just a couple of considerations for implementation as you move forward. Having tools at the ready, again, the Youth Connections Scale, Permanency Pact, mobility maps, eco mapping, using those as a standing off point as you're building trust, building rapport with youth, to have a focused conversation on who is important to them. Where do they feel their sense of belonging? If they don't have that yet, how can we get them there? Also using a trauma-informed approach. So a lot of what we've already been talking about, engaging youth in a collaborative process, really collaborative. That means that we're trusting youth, that youth are the experts in their own lives. Transparency, that we're not just doing things behind closed doors as a bunch of adults and providers, but we're engaging them in a transparent process. Normalizing feelings of grief and loss, ambivalence, allowing, understanding that many youth with disrupted networks might mistrust us, might mistrust the idea of having to count on people or rely on people. Allowing time, having the resources to debrief, to discuss, link youth with resources as needed. Again, oftentimes this means navigating difficult relationships, revisiting relationships that may not have been safe for the youth in the past, but now that they're older, maybe they can re-navigate and think about how to build healthier connections with people that still are important to them. Organizational shifts, again, I think just as a system, as organizations, thinking about how we can prioritize permanency and well-being, prioritize connectedness, prioritize belongingness, and focusing on this throughout all the work that we're doing with youth. Finally, honoring youth voice. Youth are the experts in their lives. And so making sure that we are making space for them, collaborating, again, truly collaborating and centering their voice in all that we do. And so that those are the key takeaways, what I just shared. I might have gone a little bit over at my time, but I am really excited again to just be able to share some learnings from our pilot project, and excited to see Florida kind of taking this on in different jurisdictions in different ways. So I will open this up for questions and answers. Questions, discussion, dialogue. And I think I see that Zoe did share some links in the chat while I was talking, so thank you, Zoe, for that.
Yeah, I got a couple of the links. I didn't get them all, but I tried to get a few.
Did I stop sharing, Zoe? Does that, or that either way?
It looks like we don't have any questions from anyone. So I just want to give you a round of applause and thank you again for hosting this wonderful webinar with us. And with that being said, I think we can end it.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you again.